Hello and welcome to Future Self Dreaming. My name's Carlos Kukulkan. Today I have my buddy Andrew Paradnik with me, who is infamous amongst my circle of friends because of an incident that involved me sucking on his elbow that I have relayed during a previous presentation that I did. It's nice to have you here, bro. Thanks for organising this with me.
Thank you so much. I'm honored being here.
Yeah, so I interviewed Sharon Bolt from Shamanic Energy Training last week, who's a mutual friend of ours, and we spoke about her relationship with you, and I thought, well, it's perfect that you're the next person to interview, so here we are.
Perfect, and it just so happens that I am staying at Sharon's in Melbourne at the moment for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm going to tell you about Sharon. I mean, Sharon and I go back together quite a long time. It's been, I think, 16, 17 years now since we knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we used to train together with the Taoist monks, and since we've kind of remained friends.
And so that was in London, hey?
That took out. So basically, I started my training with the Taoists over in Germany, and trained with a guy called Samuel for 2 years, which was like absolutely mind-blowing. And then at some point I met his teachers, and they basically invited me to come over to the UK and join the centers there.
Yeah. Sharon and I talked a lot about, plant medicines, mainly the subtle forms of them, like in our interview last week. And, my introduction to you was through these plant medicines, and you said something to me just before we started training about the evolution of your work that I thought would be really important to share with our audience, and also how your body of work and what you bring into the world has evolved from that. Do you remember what you said?
No, I actually don't recall. What was it something really smart?
Yeah, it sounded like that at the time. I guess it was just about evolving from working with plant medicines into the shamanic energy training, and obviously both of those things weave in together nicely, and your history of like Taoist training probably led to your your training with some of these stronger plant medicines. So yeah, I'm sure we'll say some smart stuff along the way, bro. We just
probably quoted some meme or something like that.
So so what is your body of work? Is it the shamanic energy training that Sharon's offering, or?
So yes, basically, so that started about 10 years ago when Sharon and I basically got involved into plant medicines. We tried them out, and then we were like, holy cow, there is a whole world there which we didn't pay attention to. So coming out from the Taoist trainings, you come with a relatively good expertise of anything to do with qi and energy training and martial arts and yoga. So you kind of cover the whole spectrum of healing and acupressure. So that gave us a really big overview of how energy works and how your energy relates with the world, right? So how can I change my reality by changing my own energy field? However, at the time, I was not into ascended masters, Pleiadians, big time conspiracies of UFOs, etc. And I remember I was running a complementary therapy center in London, mainly for osteopathy and Pilates, basically fixing people's bodies. And one of the osteopaths working there, Vijay, if you're watching this, thank you. He basically said, hey, read this book from Graham Hancock. The title was Supernatural. So I looked into that, and I was like, wow, there's a whole world out there which I didn't have access to. And I remember reading as a kid, I was reading the Carlos Castaneda books.
Yes.
And that was calling me, man, because the wisdom that is hidden in these books is just amazing. So read the book Supernatural, and then I was like, okay, I've got to start looking into plant medicines, into the ayahuasca, into the different types of cacti, etc. And as it came, we found someone running a ceremony about a couple of months later, and then I went, and for the first 2 days nothing happened, And I was like, oh my God, I'm such an enlightened person. This stuff doesn't even work on me. And then on day 3, the tipi kind of, the sky opened and those beings came down and we were like, look, you're late. We've been waiting for you. And, there's this whole body of knowledge that needs to be basically passed down now. And that's kind of how it started for me.
The old TP turns into a spaceship routine.
Something along those lines.
Yeah, that's amazing, dude. Graham Hancock, obviously, such an amazing body of work. And I've been reading his latest book, The America Before. It's fantastic, but obviously supernatural, focused on those plant medicines that had come out of the Amazon.
Yeah. Hero, man. I think he's the real Indiana Jones.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And lots of my presentations, there's been mentions of Carlos Castaneda, and again, another one of my presentations, an initiation that I had with one of his cohorts, Marilyn Toonshond, over in Mexico. That was a sort of a dreaming my way into that lineage of Toltec shamanism. Even though Castaneda's work is very debatable whether it was actually reality or not, but yeah.
I don't look at it this way. Look, talking about Graham Hancock, right? He's been freaking researching all of this stuff like crazy and fighting the establishment. And then in the end, he went like, you know what? I'm just going to write the same thing as fiction. And then nobody's going to bother me, right? So whether the story of Castaneda is real or not, it doesn't really matter. But the knowledge that is hidden, if you know what you're looking for, it's absolutely amazing. Same thing with the Anastasia books. I don't know if you've come across them, about this girl in Siberia that basically talks to all the plants and the animals, bring her food with superpowers. Again, is the story real or not? Tricky to say. But if you apply her methods, they work.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm reading this great book. I'll grab it here. It's called the Don Juan Papers. I think there's a couple of them, but it basically goes into Castaneda's what the authenticity of it or not, and it seems that factually is probably a lot of it was quite fictitious, but regardless of that, the authenticity of the experiences and whether he had taken ideas that were really authentic experience from yogis or shamans or whatnot and had compiled them into this body of work, it doesn't really matter. And I think that the popularity, particularly at the time of those books and things, that it really did something to the collective psyche that was ready for an entry into sort of this mythological psychedelic realm. And certainly they were a great influence on myself for many years, and still are.
Many of us. Kind of fixed up things. I've looked into Castaneda's system. I think it's called tensegrity.
Yes.
And so basically, having trained in Qigong for like decades now, the system is really, really similar, right? Yes. The moves, the way how energy flows through the body, so it works. From my perspective, it works really well, actually.
Yeah. And I learned that system and was doing Qigong many years ago as well, and I can appreciate that as well. So Graham Hancock rather, and the Supernatural book sort of like was a bit of a catalyst for you then to go and use some of these plant medicines, yeah?
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and basically when I went for like a 3-day session, then I was on the 3rd day, basically I had this absolutely amazing experience, and kind of my spirit, I met my spirit animal and some of my guides. Mm-hmm. They said, look, this is going to be an ongoing process and you're going to have to start training. And so we did. So basically I started drinking medicines probably once a month for like the first 3-4 months, and then started seeing different type of shamans, different type of try different medicines out to see what's the field, right? And as a youngling to the medicines, I was a bit careless, reckless. Sure. But with time, I realized that actually, there are some people who are holding the space quite well, and then there are some people who have basically no clue about what they're doing. And so I started to So this process started on, I don't know, several years actually, traveling from and seeing people all around the world who are organizing ceremonies. And at some point, um, we got really annoyed with how dirty actually most of the circles are in terms of energy hygiene, right? Nobody's really looking after the space. Nobody's opening up medicine wheels. There's nobody sitting there and extracting entities. Or when someone is having a possession, they really don't know what to do. So this is when Sharon and I basically sat together and said, you know what? Why don't we do something where we introduce people to a really, really clean space? Right? When we, from having worked in the centers, and they've made you clean everything so many times. I remember scenarios where you would come in and basically the teacher is like, all right, your next job is you're going to be cleaning the center, right? You haven't earned the right of a mop yet, so you're going to have to do this by hand, karate tiger style, right? The floors are freaking huge, so you're on the floor on your knees cleaning the center. And once you're done, the teacher comes in, has a look around and says, no, this is not clean enough, right? Off you go, do it again. And you're doing it again and again and again and again. So you've done this, I don't know, 10 times around, and like there's not a speck of dust. But you're furious, right? The teacher comes in and says, oh, Andrew, you've cleaned this so many times, but I still can feel anger in here. Clean it again, right? So this were their crazy approaches on to teach us how to control our energy, how to control the energy of the environment. So having learned that, we knew, okay, we can apply this to a medicine space. So we started journeying by ourselves. There were a couple of shamans who were kind enough to kind of initiate us into the medicines, and they said, look, you guys, you've done the groundwork. There's nothing that we can teach you. So go and learn and study with the plants directly, right? Without the middleman, without the shaman. So we started drinking a lot of medicine, like a lot, for a long time. And so the first thing that kind of happened is it clears you out, right? All of the stuff that is really currently on your mind, recent past, any type of toxicity in the body, you kind of get rid of that. And the next thing that we started noticing is it started improving the relationships that we have with people, partners, work, friends, etc. You kind of started paying more attention to what's the energy flow there. Are there any cords? What's going on? And once that kind of happened, it moved on to clearing out the ancestral stuff. So, I mean, from my perspective, a lot of the stuff that is playing out in our lives is actually coming from our ancestors, stuff that has not been processed or that has been passed down. So that kind of took place for quite some time. And then the medicines were like, all right, so now that we've worked together for some time and we've helped you to see and learn how this world operates, what would you like to learn next? And we were like, all right, so how about you show us how to run ceremonies? And, it's tricky to say whether this is just the knowledge of the plants that we have, because we are mixing it obviously with the stuff that we've learned previously. But what it did for us, it connected in such a way that I couldn't see those connections before. Right? It's like the medicine's like, okay, when this happens, then you do this, and this is connected to this, and so on. So it's kind of opened up the spectrum of possibility. So that's adventure and then running circles for a long time lasted about a decade. And another strange thing happened is the medicine. So the whole idea of running the medicine circles was to become the medicine, but not in the sense of I'm becoming the peyote or I'm becoming the ayahuasca, but in the sense of clearing your frequency enough so your own vibration becomes medicine.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know, purifying, cleansing the system and, opening up a proper channel. But then the strange thing happened, and I'm sure Sharon must have mentioned that to you if you spoke to her, is that the medicine said, hey, look, you're dealing with the master plants, right? And they are quite powerful and they take you on a journey. They're not like your guy being guided gently, but most of the time people are being swept away by them.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you've kind of been on the journey with us for, of course, some time now. And what it's time for you to do is to go and explore your own lineage. And we're like, oh, duh, right? I'm originally born in Poland and I grew up in Germany. And so I'm currently living in the UK. So I'm kind of covering most of Europe. And I was born into the Slavic background and basically trained most of my life in the Celtic background. And then suddenly the Taoists came in, and then, the shamanism came in, and animism, and so on. So it kind of took me off track. But on the other hand, I do understand that I needed to have this journey to be able to appreciate what I actually have from my own culture.
Yeah.
So that's kind of taken us back to basically Celtic druidism and magic.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to have met a physical teacher, this time a human, in the UK from the Isle of Man. And he basically is a witch, a druid. I mean, he's a master dowser. He is the high chief of a tribe. I mean, his story is basically like Castaneda's. It's just out of this world. And this guy basically had a very similar insight to us. It's like, okay, those systems need to be combined, right? And they need to be applied to where we are nowadays, right? Because I think what you were mentioning earlier is that the evolution of shamanism, right?
Mm.
When you go into the jungle and you're spending time with the shamans there and say you're having a really, really bad time and, crazy stuff is going down and you're purging all over the place and you can't rest your energy system and you can't focus your vision, what we would do, being trained in kinesiology and dowsing, is you just walk up to a person, tap a few points, right? They have the energetic release and off you go and continue on your journey. There's no way a traditional shaman would allow something like this to happen.
Okay.
And they're like, okay, these are our methods. This is our field. We are the wisdom keepers for the past, I don't know, thousands of years, which they are. And I highly honor them for that. But everything evolves, right? I mean, look, 50 years ago, there were freaking no computers around. This wouldn't be even possible, right?
Yeah.
So we've evolved. We have adopted those methods, both.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And basically started playing around with what can we do with our traditional magic? So we've dialed it back, and I really do feel like that after all of those years with the medicines, we started with really large doses to basically get into the process, which was a big mistake in retrospective, right? It kind of completely blew our adrenal glands, and then we had to do a lot of jing repair afterwards, like a lot. But basically, in retrospective, we realized that, to introduce people to shamanism, to drumming journeys, right? Sitting in a circle of fire and, reading the fire, playing with the elements, talking to trees, talking to the regular plants first, and learning how to do that. That kind of gives you the ability to navigate hyperspace. There we go. And then you for the stronger plants. So basically what we are doing nowadays is we are training people, we're giving them the foundation, all of the stuff that we've never heard. We had to work hard for this, right? And it's not really necessary. You can get it delivered in what was the saying? The smart person learns from their own mistakes, and the wise person learns from others' mistakes.
Yes. Yeah.
So basically, we're trying to pass our wisdom on now to people so they can get an easier introduction into the shamanic.
Yeah. I can relate to that concept. I was talking to a friend about it the other day, about a body of work that's been very influential for myself, and asking how I might have my younger self, if I had been exposed to that information 20 years ago, might have responded. And it's an interesting question, but regardless, I think if you're given a body of information, even though we might need to learn from our own experience, if you've heard some of the pitfalls and things that others have encountered along the way, when you do encounter them yourself, you might be able to go, oh, hey, I see what this is, and it might not be such a rough ride for you. So
Absolutely. I mean, the most recent field that I was like, holy cow, I haven't heard about this at all. Relationships. I was like, my entire life, I've looked into different type of disciplines, different trainings, different belief systems, right? And then suddenly I was like, I came across the field where, well, actually, there's an entire world out there telling you how to have successful relationships. I was like, what? Why does nobody tell you this stuff at school, right?
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, and then we get it role modeled to us on television and public social media and whatnot, and
The entire programming.
yeah, big time. You know, I love that term that you mentioned a moment ago, navigating hyperspace, like that concept of hyperspace, something that fascinates me, particularly in terms of sacred geometry. What's your, how would you describe linguistically this concept of navigating hyperspace?
Wow, man. Okay. So I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of the three different worlds, three levels of where we are at, right? So we're in the middle world, and then there's the upper world and the lower world. And this is
Yes.
what kind of the core shamanism agrees upon, right? And I personally believe that this applies to Earth only. Right? I mean, maybe if you're let's say you're on a different inhabitant planet out there, they're probably also going to have an upper world, lower world, and the middle world, or maybe even more. I don't know. But my point is that this is kind of contained within the Earth sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas everything that is above, outside of that, to the sides, and it's kind of all directions, I would consider that to be hyperspace. So you can journey upwards, you can journey downwards, you can journey within the astral, you can journey middle world itself, but you can move out as well and literally go into space.
Mm.
I consider those type of journeys hyperspace journeys. So say, I mean, you know, in shamanic energy trainings, we do connect to the dragon lineage. And you have dragon energies on Earth, like, you know, dragon knights and, I don't know, dragons as in mythical type of figures.
Yes.
They're also the cosmic dragons, right?
Mm.
They're not really interested in Earth so much or in humanity. They're kind of neutral beings. We don't get old enough to deal with this type of beings, right? But you can get access to them, right? And this is when you would be journeying sideways. You're journeying into hyperspace.
Mm.
So that's kind of my perspective on it. And you see, the thing that people don't probably even haven't heard about is you're going to a medicine circle, right? They're not going to tell you that there are three words, and then you know that you want to get either to the upper or lower one because this is kind of safe territory.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, this is, you know, something is going to happen. Good luck. Whereas if someone would tell you ahead, hey, you know, this is the way how you can get there, and this is the way how you can be protected, and this is a way of how to deal with a spirit if you encounter one, right? What do you do? So that's kind of what hyperspace navigation is, and it came all from the funny story. So when we started the medicines, we were kind of very clear from the very beginning that we do divide them into categories. One is the natural plants. So this could be the ayahuasca, peyote, San Pedro, the iboga, salvia, whatever is out there. And then you have extracts, right, from those medicines, which would be, for instance, the DMT or the cocaine. So from my perspective, if you have the plant as a whole, it comes with everything. It comes with spirit. Whereas if you have an extract, it's void of spirit. So that kind of puts you into a position where you will connect to your subconscious, but it will not catapult you or connect you directly to your heart center. And I know like that many people have the perspective that, I don't know, taking MDMA, for instance, is really, really hard of winning, or LSD. And I do agree with that. However, there is not a spirit there that guides it, right? So it's kind of a little bit void. So our whole perspective was that, okay, we're going to deal with the natural plants, but we're not going to be dealing with the extracts. However, because so many people have come to our sessions, and we were like talking to them and asking, so what's your experience with medicines? Have you done anything? And they're like, oh yeah, I've had LSD, I haven't had an MDMA, or I had a smoked DMT. And they were telling us their experiences, and I was like, it doesn't sit right with me. And then at some point, Sharon said, look, we're gonna have to try it, right? We're like people talking to us about their experiences, and we have basically no clue. So she came back home with some it's DMT extract applied back onto the kapi leaf, changa, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, kind of leaf and kind of DMT, and it's like a really gray zone.
Yeah.
All right, like let's see what it's like. And so we've kind of wrote it into like a spliff, and basically just sit down and had a few puffs. And like after the first puff, I can see like my spirit team panicking, coming running in. Second puff, I'm like starting to lose reality. And on the third puff, I'm completely out, right? I have no idea what's going on. Seems like I'm falling through space, right? Through different type of fractal worlds, and I'm totally lost. And I'm starting to panic, right? We didn't put up any medicine wheels. We didn't call our guides in properly. We didn't set up a ceremony. Don't have any sage there, or no Palo Santo, no Agua de Florida. I'm like lost, right? And I didn't even know what I am or what I'm called. And then this being shows up, which kind of looks like a Buddhist monk, and it says, "Stop, right? Stop right there. You've done all of this before. You've done the right steps, but right now you just don't remember." Right? So here's the first thing that you need to do: center your energy field. Boom. So I'm bringing my energy in. Then it's like now you balance your chakras. Now you're putting on a spirit armor. Now you're gonna put your team into place, right? Now you're gonna activate everything. So it basically gave me like a step-by-step instruction of the things that are required before you go into the journey.
Yes.
And well, I've kind of luckily I survived this journey, and I came out of it, and I was like, "Holy cow, this is amazing!" So I wrote all of this down and started building the hyperspace navigation steps from that, and then basically this is one of the trainings that we're doing nowadays.
Yeah, well, I remember when I did a workshop with yourself, like those steps that you were talking about were incorporated into that.
Right.
So, well, I'm glad to hear the origins of where that's come from,
Yeah,
So,
it was a journey. I wouldn't do it again.
so you have only used that channel once, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not my thing. I don't know, man. I'm not really on the chemical side of things.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I totally appreciate it, and I think it's an opinion that's shared by many people. That it's a bit of a cheat method to get into that realm, and you're not going to have the full cleansing that you're going to have from the likes of ayahuasca. And having said that, like for me, when I first used it, having used ayahuasca, it threw me into the peak of an ayahuasca experience in 30 seconds. I just found myself at that peak going, what the hell am I doing here again? Sort of thank God I haven't drank, or I'd be here for the next 6 hours rather than 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So I find that when you're journeying with DMT, the experience is just way too fast.
Yeah.
You have very, very little interaction time. It's just like it's more of like watching a movie that is forced onto you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the plants, you do have this. It's longer. This space is basically extended, and you can interact much more. Look, but on the other hand, I mean, there's some amazing research out there on basically how, for instance, the MDMA can help people with depressions or PTSD and so on. So it does have absolutely medical value. I just don't think it belongs into the field of shamanism.
Sure.
But,
Yeah. Yeah. Can totally appreciate that perspective. when you mentioned that concept of journeying sideways, you know, with the three worlds, it reminded me of Sharon and I were talking about Stuart Wilde the other day and how much of an influence he was into
Yeah.
the journey, you know, and he, in some of his body of work, he talked about that. It reminded me of it. I can't remember exactly the term that he used, but he talked about going sideways as well. Yeah.
Well, I haven't looked into many of Stuart Wilde's work. I've listened to some of his talks. This guy was actually a comedian as well. Did you know that?
Yeah, he was many things. He's a businessman, very successful businessman.
Actually, I mean, if you master your energies, you can be anything, it seems.
Yeah, you know, that concept of hyperspace, I love it. You know, again, with my history of sacred geometry, like looking at geometric pieces that kind of give your brain a reference point for an infinite amount of information that can be stored in a finite amount of information, you know. And I remember the first time I did ayahuasca, sort of journeying into the galactic core and just being the universe, and thinking at the time, how am I going to pack this level of consciousness back into my body, you know? But it's kind of a weird thought to have, because it's like you are a microcosm of the universe, you're a fractal of it, you know, so all of that sort of is inside you at the same time. But yeah, navigating this.
I'm also fascinated by the field of sacred geometry.
Yeah.
I got introduced to that so when I was in my teens, or basically when I turned from 17 to 18, I was with the Templar Knights. I was introduced to the Templar Knights, and they were big time into sacred geometry. So we started exploring the concepts of the flower of life and the Platonic solids and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got back to sacred geometry via template, right? And this is how we've kind of met.
Yes.
And you guys taken it to a completely whole new level. So after doing the template stuff, when I went back to the plant medicines, that again led me to combine different type of streams of knowledge into the work of basically creating sacred tools, which is kind of what I'm doing nowadays.
Yeah, yeah. So that was another one of the topics that I wanted to talk about, being your tools, and they're very impressive, you know, because of the amount of work that you put into it and the geometric patterns that are laid into, particularly the orgonites. Where did you, like, what was your initial influence, or what inspired you to get involved in making orgonites?
Oh my. Well, it started about 11, 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When I got into orgonites. So basically I was researching sacred tools. Right?
Yeah.
Why do the witches always have a broomstick? Why is the wizard always depicted with a staff? Why do people use mirrors for looking into the future for scrying?
Mm-hmm.
And why do those things repeat through all of the mythology, no matter where you go? Right?
Yeah.
Why do they all use the same tools? So I was looking at how the Egyptian Ankh was put together. And basically, they were putting it in organic and inorganic materials. So right at the time, I was doing a lot of dowsing training, and I came across a talk by a lady who's from Avebury, and she was talking about the biggest European stone circle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surrounded by this funny mound, and they've done basically some research on it. And she says, well, the way how it kind of was assembled, it was organic, inorganic, organic, inorganic. And I was like, hang on a second, I've heard this information somewhere else before.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, what's organic, inorganic? What does this do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I come across the work of Wilhelm Reich, which was one of Freud's students.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Freud kind of had Jung and Reich as his kind of, left and right arm. So
Yes.
they were kind of anticipated to take this work forward. However, both of them disagreed with Freud about the existence of the soul. So Freud took this, I think, this knowledge from the Vedic text, Whereas Reich was a medical doctor and he was a researcher. And he was like, hang on a second, I'm going to prove this shit. Energy exists. So basically, he started putting a laboratory together and looking at, he was trying to make the auric field visible. And he started looking at the tiniest possible beings, one or few cell organisms. And he was trying to create like a microscope or a device that will make it visible. But he had tons of interference from, I don't know, electricity, all the EMFs, X-rays, gamma rays, whatever is running through the galaxy. And he said, okay, so I'm going to have to put this into Faraday cages. So he put one Faraday cage on it, and then another one, and another one. And the more cages he basically put on, the better his test results were. So the more of a clear reading he was getting. And then he started experimenting with different type of materials. He started using metal and rubber or fiberglass or wood and so on. And basically figured out that the more of those layers there are, the better the energy becomes on the inside. But what he also started observing is that the energy seems to be flowing only into one direction. It's only going in, and it seems to be staying in there. And then he realized that as long as we put an organic layer on the outside, energy is going to be moving into one direction only, because inorganic layers bounce approximately 50% of the energy. So say you have, I don't know, wood and metal, right? And then wood and metal again. So, and chi energy will be flowing through the wood 100%. Then 50% is being bounced out by the metal, and then the rest is just being compressed, bouncing forwards and backwards to the core of whatever device you're using. So this is how the first orgone accumulators came along. And Reich basically realized that, first of all, there are accounts of him basically claiming that you could actually see the energy in his orgone accumulators. So he put them into like a really clear environment, put them into the woods where there's no interference, and then basically just closed this thing up, let it stand for a couple of months, opened it like a tiny little window and looked in. And what he was describing is that you could see the chi energy floating around like in a blue color, the way how you would be looking from space down to Earth, and you see this blue layer, right? So this is what he described. He could actually see energy in this accumulators. And then he started experimenting with them by just putting people inside. And it so turned out that those people started basically healing anything he could basically think of, right? From chronic illnesses, cancers, and all the hoo-ha. Now, back in the day, the FDA got hang of it, and they were like, okay, this guy needs to go down. He's curing all of the stuff which we say can't be cured. So they found something that he did wrong in his practice and basically locked him away. And funny enough, the latest book burning in existence in the United States were all of the works of Wilhelm Reich. So, which is really interesting. And luckily enough, some of his works basically were translated into Germany. And then about 20, 30 years ago, a couple from the States came across his works, translated them back again. And the lady that was doing that, she was kind of a medium. And she's like, hang on a second. We don't need to build those things in ginormous rooms with many, many different layers. What we could do is we could make them smaller. And what we'll have to do, though, is put a crystal right at the center. So when an orgonite sets, it creates tension, and that creates the piezoelectric effect. So one side of the crystal goes plus, the other side goes minus. So energy starts flowing one way, and then it's purified via the crystal. So the orgonite is basically accumulating the energy. It's like a magnet to chi. And then the crystal at the center purifies it. So, long story, basically, once I found out about this stuff, then I was like, holy cow, this can be combined with all the crystal knowledge that I have. This can be combined with sacred geometry. This can be combined with magic, intention setting, and so on. And that's how kind of my journey of the orgonites started.
Yeah, your pieces are, they're very unique. Like I haven't seen any as amazing.
Its own universe.
You know, as you're talking, man, I guess it was partly because you're talking about your history with the Knights Templar and the orgone at the same time. I'm racking my brain to think of this documentary. I've watched far too many of them and read too many books to remember all the names, but it'll come to me. If you haven't seen it, I'll send you a link to it somewhere. But it's this amazing documentary about the history of the Knights Templar and getting the, I think, you know, the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem or wherever it was, and basically all those divine proportions and things that were in that Ark were the template for all of the cathedrals, the medieval cathedrals and things that were, and churches and whatnot that were built, that were actually initiatory chambers, and that the way that they were built were utilizing the materials that were in them and the shapes to create like a magnetic polarity, you know, masculine, feminine, negative, positive. Right. So that as the body would go into those churches or walk along certain areas of them, you know, the body would be exposed to these electromagnetic fields, and that would awaken the energy within the body, and different things like what's the name of the windows, the type of glass that they have in the windows in the churches.
I don't know. What, murals? Is this what they're called?
It's a specific stained glass, is it? No.
But it is stained glass for sure. But
yeah.
Anyway, I'm sure people know.
Yeah, it's, you know, I don't think that we understand exactly how they made that glass, and that even being in the light that was coming through that glass, the color and whatnot would affect the auric body and take people into heightened states of consciousness. So, yeah.
Like, why are we not doing this nowadays anymore? I don't get that.
Yeah.
This knowledge is still out there. Why is there no crazy billionaire saying, I'm going to create like this frequency chamber, cathedral type of thing?
How conspiratorial do we want to get? How far down the rabbit hole do we want to go, bro?
I don't know, man. I mean, let's jump into the rabbit hole.
Where else was I was going to ask you about, was there anything else that, like, with your, like, that came out of the involvement with, like, the Knights Templar work and stuff as well?
I mean, those guys have a slightly different perspective on history in terms of what actually happened to Christ and his descendants, right? So, yeah, I mean, there's the whole secrets of how the Templars, how they came to power, what they found in Jerusalem, where this knowledge went, and who is protecting it nowadays. So basically, they believe that there are certain the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail. So it's not a grail, and it's not just a tool that people used to carry around, right? These are energy-creating devices. And so the belief is mainly that this knowledge, humanity is not ready for free energy devices. That's kind of their take on it. I don't know whether this is right or wrong. Mm-hmm. I think, like, if someone would basically create a free energy device and put it online, would this lead to the end of the world, or would this lead to paradise? I don't know. Anyhow, so basically a completely different perspective on history. And, you know, the people that you would meet there, they were like, they're smart people. I mean, university professors and historians, and they are all into conspiracy theory, right? So from UFO landing places and, you know, different type of agendas that are going around the world. So this is how I kind of got into the entire field.
Yeah.
And however, also interesting things that they do is their style of ceremonies. It's actually also really interesting to watch how those guys deal with intention and energy. And, you know, the Templars and the Freemasons they're kind of, you know, they're sitting together. And then if you look at the knowledge of the Freemasons, how they've built all of those churches, and the knowledge of this type of stone will create this type of effect, and this type of stone will create this type of effect, put it into a sacred geometry setting. And those buildings became either energy funneling centers, gathering or moving energy in particular type of ways, so you could access different type of states of consciousness. So yeah, I come across all of this type of stuff via the Templars, and I'm very, very grateful for my experiences with them.
Yeah, well, I guess living over there where you do as well, like you've got access, physically to visiting a lot of those ancient sites and stuff as well, hey?
Yeah, you do, man. It's freaking epic.
What's been, I've loved traveling around the world to various sacred sites and things, and I've always had like profound awakenings and initiations and things, fortunately, traveling to those places. What's your experience over there in the UK and other areas that you've visited with that being?
I mean, I've visited sacred sites pretty much all around Europe, but I really do like the UK sites. So my favorite is Avebury because it's the biggest stone circle that you can find. The energy is just absolutely epic, and B, you have access to it, right? It's not caged off like what you've done in with Stonehenge.
Mhm.
So those Stonehenge, we've had a few experiences in there as well, which were out of the world. A couple of years ago, we used to do like a Celtic healing tour. So taking people from around the world who have Celtic ancestry through the main Celtic sites in the UK.
Okay.
And so we had private access to Stonehenge, and we've done an ancestral drumming journey inside of the stone circle. And I mean, seriously, within like 30 seconds of drumming, I could feel my entire line just stepping up and all of the guides coming in, and the ground became warm. So, I mean, absolutely stunning. I also really like Chalice Well in Glastonbury.
Which one, sorry?
Chalice Well in
Okay.
Glastonbury.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you been to the Chalice Well before?
No, I haven't. I haven't spent any time up.
Craziest place in the world. So,
Yeah.
Glastonbury is the heart chakra of the world, right? Like Nepal is the crown chakra, so the heart chakra happens to be in the UK.
Yeah.
And so basically, this is the place where the whole history of Merlin and King Arthur and Morgana is taking place.
Okay.
So basically, it's Avalon, right? From Glastonbury, in theory, you could step through the veil into the mythical land of Avalon.
Yes.
So the Glastonbury Tor has a spring that comes in from underneath. And then right at the bottom of the Glastonbury Tor, you have another spring, which is the red spring that comes out of the ground. And these are the representatives of the red Glastonbury dragon and the white Glastonbury dragon. So those streams come together and flow together right next to each other, right where the Chalice Well Gardens are.
Mm-hmm.
So some really smart person. I mean, Glastonbury has a crazy history anyway because the first cathedral in the UK was built in Glastonbury, so that was a huge metropolis back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But that in time kind of passed. But someone smart remembered all of those histories and kind of kept the Chalice Garden there for ages. And so they built this well there where the red stream is flowing along. And this well is it's like a willow. I'm not even sure if it is a willow, but it's like a tree that just bends down and covers you whole. And the energy in this place is just insane. It's dedicated to the goddess Morgana. So Morgana is Merlin's sister who ascended, right? She was a human and became a goddess. And the energy that comes out of this space is just, you go there and you just sit down, and within a few seconds you feel peace. Like everything is just covered within peace. Absolutely stunning. And they have two really, really old yew trees as well there, which turned out to be one yew tree. I don't know if you know this, but yew trees are very, very old evolutionary trees, right? From an evolutionary perspective. And as the yew tree gets older and older, what happens is they kind of open up and then they split, and then they start wandering apart. And it's like a centimeter every like 40 years they move apart. And those trees, they're like 10 meters away from each other. They are the guardians of this garden. And so they've done like DNA tests on them, and it's the freaking same tree, right? It's the same DNA. And what they tend to do is the yew tree is the only tree we know of that can change its gender. It's like a hermaphrodite. It can choose to be male and female. And so those trees alternating every year change gender and basically look at the aura of those guardians is just amazing. So they look after the guardians of the child as well. If you're ever in Glastonbury, man, you've got to check out this place. It's phenomenal.
It's it's an area that I guess I really should explore at some stage. Like when you were talking earlier about exploring ancestral roots, I suppose there's been so many of us displaced around the planet, and the history of Australia only been a couple of hundred years since colonial settlement here. A lot of the people here are refugees or convicts and whatnot, and my ancestry comes from Scotland on my mother's side directly, and then there's some German and other Viking lineages, which I should get over there to explore at some stage.
Find your ancestral lands. I mean, at least once in a lifetime, do go on a journey where you can actually pick up the energy, right? So it's like puzzle pieces that your energy body needs to make like a clear picture of what's actually going on. And I really do believe that it is important to connect to your ancestry, because we do have magical lineages, right? And tapping into someone else's lineage, I don't know, learning some sort of a Navajo magic or Siberian magic, fine. I mean, it's all gonna work, and these are good systems. But you definitely should look at your system as well. Where do you come from, and what was the knowledge of your ancestors? Makes a huge difference to the power actually that you can hold.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that, and that part of the world I'll definitely get to at some stage. I feel really blessed to have had those sort of awakenings, whether it be on a soul level or whatnot, from visiting what feels like my soul lineages in Egypt and Mexico and other parts around the world, And interestingly, there's a lot of stuff for me personally really awakening about my connection to Indigenous Australian heritage here at the moment as well. So that's sort of an ongoing unfolding that's happening that I'm really appreciating as well.
Yeah, well, I don't really know much about the Aboriginal knowledge, but I mean they pretty much live in the dream time from what I understand. So it would be tricky to see whether how open they are to the white man to basically teach this knowledge. I think
Yeah,
a lot of they will be rather reserved, no?
yeah. From my limited experience with Indigenous people in this country, they the older ones that are still out living on country and whatnot, they are reserved, and they you sort of just got to go and be around them and let them teach you in their own time. But yeah, I have very limited experience with that. I found it really interesting, talking about Graham Hancock earlier, about the when he goes into the ancestry of peoples in the Amazon, that there's a genetic marker from Australia. And basically what he's looking at there in this book, America Before, is the concept that prior to the last ice age, where there was the ice sheets across North America, and it was basically impossible to cross that, I think it's the Bering Strait or wherever, and come down through North America and into South America, that there were seafaring civilizations that could cross the Pacific. And certainly, there's records of that with people in Polynesia and New Zealand, Hawaii, going across there. But it's really interesting that the genetic markers are identifying that there's Indigenous Australian in the Amazon, and
Interesting.
yeah, it's and that knowledge, that's been in the Amazon for thousands of years about the use of ayahuasca. That potentially Indigenous Australians were using that as well here. There's plenty of plants in Australia that contain DMT as well. And yeah, it's just fascinating, like that he's totally uprooting our ideas of history and migrations around the planet and whatnot. So
Yeah, history is just like, I'm not, well, I am buying some of it, but really when it goes like a little bit early on, say 15,000 years ago, what's been happening during that time span. Plus, I mean, look, man, humanity is really young, or the way how we know humanity is really young. God knows what was happening a million years ago. Maybe humans were around, maybe we degenerated, is this the word?
yeah,
Or evolved, right? And then, maybe we evolved back up again. God knows.
yeah,
So there are some things that are being discovered all around the world. Like I'm sure you've read about Global Katapi.
yes,
Syria, I mean, like, come on, man. Like, an entire system and carving and symbols, basically carbon dated 15,000 years back, right?
mm,
That's 6,000 years older than any written history that we know of.
mm,
And nobody talks about this type of stuff. And
mm,
then, there are, what you call it, they found like really weird devices in coal deep down underground, right? And nobody knows what the hell it is, but it looks like a computer. How did this get down there like a million years ago?
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, written history is just like the winners who are writing history, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Dude, how much does a study of psychology, if any, influence your work? Because it's for me, it's been a fascinating subject. I went back to uni a couple of years ago and did a counselling degree that was all
Uh,
psychology based, and I appreciate some of the modern day founders of that as being shamanic. You mentioned Jung before, and I think there's been plenty of people that have contributed to the body of work that we now describe as psychology. But you've obviously studied things like hypnotherapy and whatnot. Like, how much does that
yeah.
inform?
Look, I mean, I haven't studied psychology, but I'm really interested in that field. So I've read some of Jung's works. You mentioned earlier Stanislav Grof.
Yes.
I don't remember what the title of that book was. A friend of mine introduced me to it. Really big fan of Jordan Peterson as well.
Yeah.
So his lectures at the University of Toronto, which are available online,
Yeah.
blown away by it. So yeah, I'm interested in that field, but I would not be saying that I'm some sort of a practitioner that really knows a lot about that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, like Stanislav Grof is his work being one of the founders of transpersonal psychology. It's certainly given me uh, a lot of benefit understanding some of those concepts and experiences and whatnot in terms of plant medicine. And I think that anyone that enters into that realm would do well to read his research and stuff,
Completely agree.
particularly. Yeah, like, I have explained it on that presentation, but the experience that I had with ayahuasca, where I experienced an extreme regression, back to a perinatal fetal state of consciousness in the womb. And I know lots of people have these types of experiences, and Groff, using LSD, even though, we were talking before about some of these chemical extracts and whatnot, perhaps not having the same spirit connected to them. Certainly they've opened up whole realms of knowledge and informed that body of work that he's compiled.
And they do have a really, really high impact on putting the mind together if it's fractured.
Mm.
So yeah, man, go Stanislav Grof.
Yeah, yeah, it's made a huge contribution.
Useful, especially for people who basically getting into plant medicines. You should know about this type of stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
people diving into this world without knowing how to swim. It's almost scary.
yeah. Well, I'm always hesitant about quoting anything by Aleister Crowley, but he, being a magician, was one to always say that you had to be in extremely good physical condition, that you should have studied a whole bunch of different areas and whatnot before getting into anything magical, because you're likely to send yourself crazy as a result of that.
Very interesting. Interesting character. Recently, it must be like 1.5 years ago now. So we went to the Museum of Magic and Witchcraft, which holds the original chalice of Aleister Crowley and his original tarot deck. And I kid you not, and the energy that was coming off those objects was just insane. Apparently, the people who are running this museum kind of know how to contain magic, and nonetheless, it was just like, wow. So this guy had power.
Oh, for
I thought
sure.
that, didn't the church say that he was the most dangerous man alive at that time?
Yeah, well, that's why, like I'm really, uh, I guess I came to appreciate Aleister Crowley's work through the likes of Robert Anton Wilson, and we need to put really in context of the time that he was around, the influence that the church had, and the fear mongering and propaganda and whatnot, and that he was a total renegade at that time. And even though perhaps some of his methodologies and whatnot are questionable, I think that in this day and age, there's being that level of renegade is probably pretty commonplace. But back in the day, he was extreme.
But I mean, even nowadays, it's pretty much always, well, I mean, really always, but church is basically saying, hey, plant medicines, satanic, shamanism, satanic, yoga, meditation, satanic. The Inquisition is still after us.
Sure, for sure. I mentioned that to you that I always like to ask people that I'm interviewing about the concept of their higher self, or
Right.
that term. Like, does the concept of the higher self have any meaning to you? And if so, what's your experience of that been, and how does it inform what you're doing currently?
So the I'll tell you the Taoist perspective on the higher self because I really like the explanation of it. So there is the ego and the higher self, and we do not. So the higher self is what's representing the soul desire,
Mm.
right? So what does your soul want to learn? What does it want to explore in this lifetime? What are the lessons that are coming? And so your soul desire is to go that particular path, almost like your destiny.
Yep.
And the counterpart is basically the ego, the small self, the me wanting this or that, etc.
Yep.
So the Taoists used to say that you measure the the higher self versus the ego in terms of win-win or win-lose. So for instance, if I help an old lady across the road, right? I don't know, she has heavy bags, I help someone out, right?
Yeah.
And I don't expect to be paid for it or anything like that or being appreciated. I just do it because I think like, oh, somebody is struggling, off I go and do that. That would be a true self desire.
Mm.
However, if I go home and then I start bragging to my friends about the same situation that just happened, look at me, man, I'm such a hero, I've helped this lady out, then this again becomes an ego thing, even though it's the same type of situation, right?
Yeah.
So the Taoists say that whatever you do, you have to ask yourself, is this a win for you and a win for everybody else? And if it is, this desire is coming from the higher self. Whereas on the other side, if you do something and you create some harm to someone else, or just it's purely for yourself,
Mm.
it, it's your ego desire. So that's kind of their take on it, and I really like that. So I'm trying to do that with all of the stuff that I do. It's just like, do I just want this, or is this beneficial for myself, people, the planet, everything?
And how do you determine that for yourself? Like, what's your methodology to?
I ask people that are smarter than me. So look, this is the great thing that I have, like having the guys like Joe over in the UK, and then Joseph here and Sharon. I usually double check any type of major decisions with those type of people or people who I think are wise and experienced elders.
Mm.
And I ask them, hey, you know what? If I do this or that in my life, is this coming from me, or do you see that this actually benefiting everybody else or not? And so it's good to have honest people around you that basically tell you in your face, no man, you're talking shit now.
I liked Sharon sharing the Taoist training that she had done about dissolving the ego and her love of shoes and then confiscating those or getting rid of them. And I think yours was food she was talking about, hey?
And you know, the craziest thing about this is actually, this is like 16 years later now, right? Like, so she mentioned this a few times about the food, right? That they basically were withholding food about from me. And I'm like, yeah, when I remember like my first 6 months, I was pretty much always hungry, right? And I was like, what is this? So now we're sitting here, and she's like, haha, do you remember like we used to go home with the rest of the Taoist students, etc., and then we used to go and eat and not tell you that we're going out to eat. So and I was like, you shitting me? You were like in on this?
I really liked her description of, like kind of stripping back the ego to get, to allow that core self to shine. That was a bit like you were describing earlier on about the Taoists, what was it? Sort of getting back to, or becoming the medicine, this idea of like the plants and whatnot cleaning you out and getting you back to, a core self that can then radiate that frequency into the world, and Sharon had something similar to say about that, about getting...
Yeah, very true. So the whole idea about this is basically taking away your sources of energy. And your source of energy can be an emotion, it can be a person, it can be food, it can be a certain type of activity that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so they're cutting you off from your family, your friends, people you know. Literally, it's like you're surrounded by strangers, very bossy strangers. Mm. And yeah, for me it was the food. For her, it was basically her shoes. And for others, they were using different modalities like tarot or some sort of for energy healing. And they were like, look, hands off, completely hands off everything. Right? What you need to learn is how to channel energy from source. Mm. And put you in like crazy, we call them burning positions or holding postures, where you have to be like in a really awkward position, like hugging the tree, standing there for hours and hours. And your physical body cannot cope with it, right? It's completely possible. So what has to happen is your energy body needs to adapt and open up the channel, and then you start funneling the energy through. Then the energy body starts opening up, and the chakras start opening up, and you start clearing out from the inside. So that was basically the benefit that we had when entering the shamanic space, right? I knew what it's like to be me, to have a clean energy field. So now I'm sitting in a shamanic circle, and I get some sort of an energetic attachment, or something jumps me, and I'm like, oh, hang on a second, this isn't right, because I know what my original energy body feels like. Whereas someone who's completely new to that field is like, okay, I'm having all of those crazy sensations, and basically it's some sort of demonic entity nesting. I don't know, if one of your energy cores, right? God knows what's going on in those circles.
Yeah. It's reminding me of a talk that I had with my Flower of Life trainer, Ronald Holt, some months ago, about some of the training that I did with the Flower of Life organisation originally, and they did lots of Taoist training, and they incorporated that into the trainings that they offered, and we did lots of Qigong, for that reason, building energy and holding those stances for quite long periods of time. And as you say, you think that your body's not going to be able to handle it, and then you just keep reading and whatnot, and before long you're standing in these positions for hours.
So that's kind of the whole Taoist training is the core of our philosophy, right? In the teachings that we're doing nowadays, because if you really want to grow, you can't do that without a decent energy source, right? And you can't be taking energy from other people, and you can't be getting... I mean, the food nowadays is rubbish anyway. I mean, look, even the organic food, if you compare what food used to be like back in the day and how many minerals and vitamins it used to contain and what it is now, it's just not enough. Mm. If you want to grow spiritually, if you want to grow mentally, if you want to become better as a person, you need to have energy, and you're not gonna get far if you don't do some sort of a training. So yeah, yoga is great. I mean, Tai Chi is great. I mean, there are many different forms nowadays of all of this type of stuff, but we found that the Taoist trainings and the Qigong actually work the best when it comes to energy gathering.
Yeah, I really like that concept of the ego as well, and whether we're talking about it in terms of kind of new age concepts or the traditional reference to I think it was Freud's idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. But I think the best description for me of like personal growth around the ego has been not in terms of killing the ego or dissolving the ego, but expanding the boundaries of it. And that the ego, if we want to call it that, is our perceptions and our comfort zones, and that that gives us a sense of safety in the world.
Yep.
The known patterns and whatnot. But we outgrow it at certain points in our life, and we have to expand beyond those comfort zones.
The Taoist, so what I was mentioning earlier about the win-win-win-lose situation, right? So the Taoists were basically saying that, I lost my train of thought about this. Next question, sorry.
Yeah, I get how that happens. I don't know, we're talking about the ego, dissolving the ego, expanding.
So basically they're saying, look, you have to use the ego as a driving force.
Yeah.
Everybody has an ego, and it's normal, it's an evolutionary step, right?
Yeah.
So say, look, I'm into spirituality, into healing, and I want to become the greatest healer in my discipline, right? That is, or it sounds at least like an ego desire. I want to be the best. However, if I actually pull it off, if I study like crazy, and I do become better and better and better over the years in what I do, right? Then this ego desire has actually led me to my true self desire, and now it's a win for the world, and it is a win for me. I'm good at what I'm doing. I'm helping the people. I'm helping the planet.
Yeah. I keep having the vision of a meme that you've probably seen floating around on social media. It's got a few different, it's the same sort of concept, but one of it is a little person standing at the edge of a cliff with this huge hand kind of flicking it off the cliff, and it's saying plant medicines, and then there's the other hand down the bottom saying also plant medicines, and sometimes the meme is like God, the ego, and also God here, and I can totally relate to that. I'm sure you can, in terms of all your experiences, be them plant medicines or other initiations that have expanded your sense of self, because you realize, well, there is this bigger, call it the higher self if you like, that's for me, again, that concept you said before, kind of driving our destiny or our purpose, and that we can choose to align ourselves with that, or we can choose to fight against it, but ultimately it's going to give us a kick in the butt and get us back on track in one way or the other.
It seems like you can't avoid it. The lessons are just reoccurring, they keep coming back if you're basically fighting your destiny. Oh yeah, what can you do? I mean, plant medicines is not the safest way of getting into all of that. Definitely not, man. I really do believe that people should do the groundwork and start with some sort of meditation, Reiki, learn the field. I mean, expand the perception first, right? And then once you kind of get an overview of what energy works like and how your energy flows, and you're actually gathering some energy that you do have some power, right? Then start exploring plant medicine. Well, maybe even not then. Go for drumming journeys, and maybe then into the softer energy, softer plants, and then into the master plants.
I really appreciate that advice coming from you, like given your history of experience and facilitation and whatnot with that, because I think it's the plant medicine has become a real popular fad, and that, as we were talking about earlier in the interview, that learning from other people's mistakes, that wisdom. If you can appreciate somebody's got a lot of experience and knowledge, they might be able to be pointing you in the right direction. And I think you certainly are in terms of the statement that you've just given around that.
I very much so. And, all of the trainings that we basically put together is kind of well, the Tao, the pathway, an easier pathway. So we walked this already, right? And we felt all of the traps and all of the craziness that comes with it. And so we thought, like, you know what, so Sharon came up with that, is how can we deliver this knowledge in a way that is going to be easiest applicable to people? And she said, why don't we teach it in a way how we would like to have received it back in those times? And so, yeah, basically throughout all of, starting from journey training, drumming trainings, then learning how about your spirit allies, your upper and lower friends, your spirit animals, hyperspace navigation, how to gather power, and then finally basically that leads into, plant medicine, ceremonialism, which we do run in Bali. So, yeah, you should come back.
Yeah, I may do. I've kind of sworn off going to Bali over recent years, but for some reason it's giving me a nudge from several directions recently, so I won't completely rule that out. And the other thing that I wanted to say, I may have mentioned it with Sharon or somebody recently, is that my experience of using these quite powerful plant medicines, there's always been a real green light leading up to them, that like very strong signs, omens, energy that's given me the green light. And if I take it for any other reason other than when I've been sort of given that permission slip, it can be detrimental. So I think like learning to look for that, not search it out, but know when that spirit's coming and knocking on your door and saying, hey.
Yeah. You see, you're like an experienced cosmonaut. I don't know how to call it, man. I mean, you've done probably hundreds and hundreds of journeys yourself now.
No, I've done very little, to be honest. I stopped drinking alcohol when I was 19. That was a big part of my journey, ancestry, history of alcoholism and whatnot, and I was killing myself with that, and so I smoked my fair share of weed and stuff during high school and nearly drank myself to death, but I didn't touch anything for 16 years, and then I started familiarizing myself with cannabis again, and then that opened all the doorways to other things, but it's also been something that I have not needed to use for the last few years as well, and so I appreciate my experience with it, but
it seems like there has been this wave. I don't know when it even started. I would assume kind of, I don't know, since the hippies basically came along. And so this wave of the shamanic plants calling people, right, from all around the world. And maybe it has simply also to do with the fact that now we can, sit in a plane for an hour, a few hours, and then you are in a place where you can legal access to those plants. It became kind of like a tourist thing.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else that you're feeling to share in particular, dude? I was going to ask you about you did mention the shamanic tools and energy tools and things earlier, but we only touched on orgonites. Is there anything else that you're making as far as?
I mean, basically, the orgonites kind of led me into the field of shamanic tools, right? Because once I realized that you can assemble them with sacred geometry and you can put crystal grids into them, what happens? Those devices become like little batteries for the law of attraction, right? So you have an orgonite, which most of the organites nowadays are some sort of like a pyramid with very little metal at the bottom, and there's some sort of a crystal at the top. Yes, those devices kind of work, but they kind of work, right? Whereas if you get the proportions right, what happens is it really becomes like a magnet. And now all of this chi energy that is coming from all around you, it's kind of like all of the frequencies that are bouncing around and that are harmful to us, the orgonite picks them up from your energy field and transforms them in a very, very fast way. So I was like, okay, if we put sacred geometry into it and align all of the crystal grids around the sacred geometry, what we can now do is we can store this energy. And once you can store the energy in a crystal grid, you can give it a specific intention. And now you have all of this energy that is flowing through your energy field, and it's basically coming through your amulet, being cleaned out. And now this thing gives off the vibration that you want to give off. So rather than, using the law of attraction is not an easy thing to do, because you kind of need to maintain a certain frequency, right? Or say you want abundance, you need to feel abundant. But if you're getting home and all the things that you have at home are broken and old and your car is not right, it's really difficult to hold a vibration of abundance during the type of time. So rather than trying to beam this all energy off the whole time, what I do is I create a ceremony. I create an orgonite that is where the crystal grids resonate with the frequency already, and then I put an intention onto it. And now this thing will charge my intention. So that's kind of how I've gotten onto the orgonite. But they've taken on a whole evolution of. So I started looking into magnets. It seems like that when you're running blood past specific flux in magnets, the blood decluts and it starts spinning the right direction. So that's a huge benefit on your energy body. And wearing a magnet in front of your heart chakra also amplifies the toroidal field. So that's one thing that we started putting in there. Then I looked into tensor rings, right? So if you have you heard about tensor technology?
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's basically the twisted copper rings, right, which are kind of reattached to each other, and they basically generate also a field of etheric energy. Oh, there you go. Right.
What was the dude's name? I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Hang on a second. I can't tell you his names from the top of the head, but I do know that I have
Slim Sperling.
Where?
Slim Sperling. Did you get that?
That's right. The Lord of the Rings. So basically, we started putting that in there. Then we've started experimenting with different types of coal, so carbon, and as well as shungite, because they have very strong EMF protective abilities. Then we've started putting mirrors into them. So, like in magic, quite often people use mirrors to deflect hexes, minor spells, minor curses, so you can use mirrors for that. And we started using one-sided mirrors, as you want the energy from the orgonite to be going out into your field, right? But if someone attacks you energetically, you would usually hit someone either at the solar plexus or the heart chakra. So it's an easy way of getting into someone's energy field. So when you're wearing a mirror in front of it, it kind of protects you from the main impact. And it's easy. I mean, if you're a little bit into magic, have you seen the Witcher series?
No, I haven't watched it. I've heard it's terrible.
Anyhow, so in the original stories of The Witcher, what happens is he's wearing a medallion, and whenever there's magic around, it slightly vibrates. So this is what I'm getting from my organites. If there's something wrong in the field, I can feel it straight away.
Oh,
so
I've had that experience with wearing energy devices and things as well. Like sometimes, a friend of mine actually explained one time he was wearing one of these Tesla plates, and every time he would drive past a certain area, he would feel it like ramping up, and then he realized that he was driving past a electrical substation, and that was what it was trying to protect him from, presumably.
Yeah. So it's basically a combination of many basically tools that I've come across in my life, and I've kind of assembled them into like one piece. And then I started doing altar pieces and talismans. So amulets are generally speaking for protection, whereas talismans are devices that give you power. And then once I started studying Celtic Druidism and Celtic magic, I was like, hang on a second, there's more to this, right? We can make wands, we can make staves. Now I'm in the process of making Sharon her witch's broom. So our teacher basically started explaining us how the dimensions are, what the correct dimensions are, how to use those type of tools. And I find that nowadays, I mean, I'm working with a staff, I'm working with a sword, I'm working with a wand, and they do come really useful. They do amplify your energy field quite a lot, so you have access to more power simply via those.
I'll show you something that I made when we get offline later. I won't put it on here, but I'm sure it will interest you. I'm fascinated with that, how blood always comes into magic and native ceremony and things. There's what was coming to mind, a couple of things as you were talking about the influence of some of these energetic devices on the blood. There's a naturopath near where I live named Greg Fredericks, and he's got this dark field live blood analysis machine. So you can actually pinprick your finger and he'll put it on some slides and then bring it up on the computer screen, and you can see your blood cells, what they're doing, how they're interacting, other bacteria and things that are in your blood, and whether it's clustering together and different things, and
history of like literally your entire life just looking at this. It's crazy, no?
Yeah, fascinating. And the blood being, I've got to understand this concept more. A buddy of mine who passed away a couple of years ago named Dan Schreiber, he was kind of I guess in many ways the influencing factor for me desiring to do these types of interviews and presentations myself, because he was just a living library on legs, that when he was talking, I was listening, and he used to talk about the way that Indigenous Aboriginals in Australia would use the ochre. They use it in their ceremonies and whatnot, and apparently the ochre has a really high iron content, and our blood, being largely made of iron, in my understanding, like something to do with the toroidal field of the blood, and the ochre and the way that it connects to the magnetic ley lines of the earth and whatnot. And I've got this book, I'll show it to you, because I'm pretty sure he understood a lot of these concepts from this book. It's called Voices of the First Day. It's by an author named Robert Lawler, and Robert Lawler was he was very influential in sacred geometry as well. He wrote it might just be called Sacred Geometry. I can't remember it at the moment, but he also wrote one called The Geometry of Time or something. But this book is amazing, and it's got these concepts about the use of ochre and whatnot for those reasons in it. So have you got anything to share about that?
Blood itself in magic is really interesting. The Taoists say that the term qi is translated into two ways, right? The normal translation is life force, but the other translation of qi is actually blood. And they're well aware about the fact that when your blood circulation is good, your qi energy flow is good. Or if, say, you repair your qi energy flow, your circulation fixes itself.
Yeah.
And then, did you come across the photon DNA effect? Have you? I think David Wilcock talks a lot about this.
Yes.
I don't know the exact story with the correct name, so I'll give it to you in a nutshell. So basically, there were two Russian scientists who were trying to see what happens to light when how light behaves when it's around DNA. So they've kind of split a cell open, put the DNA strand on like a tiny little quartz plate, and then they have this quartz in a device which has like perfect mirrors, right? Attach a mini camera, like a camera light emitting device to it, whatever it's called, and they start shooting photons into it, and now the photons are bouncing around this piece of DNA inside, and they're monitoring this whole thing, right? So really, the light should be bouncing in a random way, depending on the angle that you've shot it in there, I guess. But what seems to be happening is the blood actually, after some time, and I believe it's 12 to 30 hours or so, starts floating around the DNA. So it seems like DNA itself is bending light, and those guys got the Nobel Prize for this research.
Yeah.
However, the really interesting thing to me that happened afterwards is as they were finishing all of the experiments, putting all this stuff away, and there was no DNA left in this device, they've still run one of those sets of those measurements. And it seems like the light still remained in the same space where the DNA was, even though the DNA was taken out.
Yes.
So that's kind of the same type of effect that people, for instance, experience when, say, someone loses a limb. And then they have this phantom itching still, as if the fingers were still there. And basically, what the mediums or people who with the psychic abilities, what they're doing, you give them a ring of someone, right? And then they hold the ring, and then they're reading this ring. What are they really reading? It's they're reading the frequency of the DNA that has been left behind back. And
Yes.
that ties into your blood, right? And blood magic. So today, when we were getting some branches from the park for the broom that we are building, and so as I'm cutting them, I cut my finger. And she was like, yay, blood offering from the wizard for my broom.
Yeah, I've also accidentally leaked my blood during some of these spontaneous sort of initiations or rituals that have happened at times, and offered it unconsciously back into the earth.
Yeah,
And you know that whole concept of the phantom DNA, or DNA affecting our light, gives a whole different reference point for me personally of the light body and how our physical body is basically light on some level anyway, but how it's influencing the light around us too.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really DNA itself, very, very interesting concept. I mean, we could probably dive into that and do a whole entire talk on DNA itself, right? The access to the universe, the different strands that we can access nowadays. I don't know if you've been reading any of this, that they are finding 3- and 4-strand DNAs in humans nowadays.
I've read certain things like that before. I mean, for me, probably some of the most fascinating work around that is by the likes of Dan Winter. And when you get into sacred geometry and the shape of the DNA, that a rotating cube that forms a dodecahedron, and how the light or the DNA is a spiral, and you can get these faster than light speeds through the central helix of the DNA, superluminous.
Maybe even holes and access keys to different dimensions. I mean, seriously.
Mind blowing. Cool, man. Well, look, it's been really interesting talking with you, and I'm sure that we'll do it again at some stage. How can people, if they're interested in getting in touch with you, doing some of your training or purchasing your orgonites and stuff, how can people contact you?
I mean, when it comes to the training, right now, shamanicenergy.com.au.
Yep.
So this is where the training in Australia is basically introduced. My personal site is organizedart.com, and if you Facebook me, Organized Art and Commissions. Instagram, I think it's also Organized Art. So yeah, basically my body of work is making customized tools for people. So talking about the DNA, what mainly do is people who have some sort of I don't know, they say you are into meditation, or say you're into energy healing, right? So this is your field. And you want to improve on your abilities, and you want to be protected from all the stuff that is going on in the soup, the new 5G and whatever that they're introducing nowadays. So what I do is I take people's DNA, and so basically we take a hair sample, and then via kinesiology surrogate testing or via dowsing, we check what type of crystal, what type of color, what type of metal is required, and then we customize those devices for people. So that's kind of my main thing. So if people are interested in that, you can find me via Facebook. I think it's the easiest. The shop that I have on Etsy with available pieces is called Neo Shamanism.
Okay, I'll put all those links in the bottom of the YouTube presentation as well. Do you put like any of the actual biological material, be it hair or otherwise?
It was right at the center. So you have the center crystal.
Yeah.
Right. You have the mirror, which is kind of has a hole underneath, and this is where your hair is lying. So basically, I mean, in voodoo, hoodoo, or whatever, they use DNA to create harm to someone, right? Once you have someone's DNA, you can cause a lot of damage. And so what we're doing is the reverse of it, right? We're putting your DNA in the well, in the most clean possible place, right? Right where the energy is being transferred into the positive energy field. So, and this basically also deals with the photon DNA effect, because if you have your DNA in that type of an environment, this device will directly beam the energy to you into your field. You don't actually have to wear it. So yeah.
that you know, as you were talking about that as well, that I think it's the author Lynn Taggart that wrote that book, The Field, and have you come across that at all?
Nick Taggart, yes.
Yeah, and Rupert Sheldrake's work and whatnot. It's all fascinating when it comes to that. I find it. I was talking to somebody in an interview or a talk or something the other day just about, you know, the experience of group work, the experience of being in a group of people, and it even happens all the time within, say, a business setting when you're at a business meeting, you know, like, but you're in that group field and you'll start having questions and things, and it's like you've asked them and you haven't, people start giving you the answers back and whatnot, and I really love group work for that, of what takes place in the field. And I mean, obviously, as we've experienced on some of these entheogens and whatnot, the level of sort of empathy or sensitivity that you have, you know, you start needing to determine what's yours and what's somebody else's, because you're so deeply connected to everybody else that's in that group around you.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you get it right, and if the field that you're working on is clean and the environment is set right, and whatever magical type of work that you are doing is done by someone who knows their craft, you do get entrainment, right? You do connect to the earth frequencies. People connect to each other, and consciousness really starts opening up. Yes. So yeah, absolutely. Thumbs up to group work for sure.
Yeah, I keep wanting to just keep bouncing on to the next subject with you, bro, but we probably should wrap it up. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Let's do it again at some stage soon, and I look forward to seeing you in the flesh soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Carlos. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, much love, my man.
All right, all the best. Bye.